If you go pretty much anywhere in a major mountain range during the winter, say the Rockies, Alps, or Himalayas, chances are just about everything is buried under feet of snow. The sight of an endless expanse of white can seem like a completely alien landscape, especially if you come from a warm tropical climate where it doesn't snow that often to begin with. But what if I told you that this thick layer of snow can actually be vital to the survival of ecosystems far from the mountain range itself? It is the source of drinking water for millions of people and is necessary for winter sports like skiing and snowboarding. It's what we call a snowpack. Now, before we get into the frigid, snowy fields of the high alpine, I'd appreciate you to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell to stay tuned for future content. Okay, so what exactly is snowpack and why is it so important? Well, as stated before, it's basically a layer of snow that accumulates, usually in high mountain areas, over the span of an entire winter. Typically, when it snows in lower elevations or warmer climates, it'll snow, clear up in a few days, and then it gets warm enough for that snow to melt off. However, in colder climates, it rarely gets above freezing during the heart of winter. So instead of melting, fresh snow will compact and harden over time, becoming a layer of ice that will take quite a bit more time and effort to melt off. Eventually, new snow will fall on top of this layer, and the cycle repeats. On average, snowpack begins to build in October or November when it starts getting cold enough to produce major snowstorms, and it keeps on building until it reaches a peak in March or April, after which it starts to really warm up and the snow rapidly melts off. In general, the more snow that a mountain range gets over the course of a winter, the more snowpack is able to build, and thus the more water that is able to melt off in the spring. However, there are a few things that make this extremely nuanced. The biggest thing is that two snowstorms that produce the same amount of snow can have vastly different amounts of water that is contained in that snow. Generally, the colder an environment is, the lighter and fluffier a snowstorm's snow will be, and thus the less water that snow will hold. As a result, it's a general rule that warmer snowstorms, where temperatures are closer to freezing, are the best for building up snowpack. But this can be a double-edged sword because it can also increases the chance of that snow melting too soon. As a result, how big the snowpack is isn't measured on how deep the snow is, but rather by a metric known as snow water equivalent, which is a fancy way of saying how much water the snowpack contains overall. So why does that matter? Well, when it comes spring and it finally starts getting warm enough for the snowpack to really melt off, all of that water ends up in lakes, rivers, and streams, where it then flows downstream towards the ocean. In the process, this water is crucial for maintaining ecosystems close to these rivers and lakes, since water is necessary for living things to survive. In addition, snowmelt is the primary source of drinking water for many drier climates where rain is scarce. If a drought hits and significantly less snow falls in the mountains compared to normal, then all of these downstream areas dependent on that water take a hit. So, what are some major examples of snowpack being influential in shaping downstream areas and their access to water? Well, perhaps the most infamous case nowadays involves the Colorado River, which flows through the southwestern U.S. and is fed by mountain snowpack from parts of Colorado, Utah, Wyoming, and New Mexico. The Colorado River itself has two major artificial reservoirs along its path, Lake Mead and Lake Powell, with the former being just downstream of the Grand Canyon near Las Vegas, and the latter being in a remote section of the Arizona-Utah border. In the past couple decades, consistently lower than average snowpack in the Rocky Mountains helped drain both lakes to far, far below their normal levels, which had the side effect of creating enormous and eye-popping bathtub rings, where the water took red desert rock and bleached it white. Both lakes are major sources of drinking water for Arizona, Nevada, and Southern California, which combined are home to tens of millions of people. After a particularly severe drought hit in 2020, Lake Mead plummeted to the lowest level seen since it was initially being filled up a century earlier, triggering water cuts in Arizona and raising fears that it would enter dead pool, which means no water can leave the lake, which would cause a crisis in the lower Colorado River basin. Both Lakes Mead and Powell have recovered somewhat after a record-breaking snowpack in the Rocky Mountains during the winter of 2022, but they are still quite a ways below their full levels, and it will take several more winters before they can return to normal. But the American West is far from the only place where mountain snowpack is important. In fact, in the case of the ancient Nile River, it shapes a way of life. You see, the Nile River has two major tributaries, the White and Blue Niles. While the White Nile has a steady flow throughout the entire year, The Blue Nile sees a massive influx of flow each August thanks to the melting of an enormous monsoonal snowpack in the Ethiopian mountains. This excess water made it its way into ancient Egypt, where the Egyptians were able to build extensive canals and other irrigation systems to divert the flooding. This not only spared major cities and towns along the Nile, but it also still fertilized the river plain to an extent basically unheard of elsewhere in the Sahara. This fertilized soil could then be used to plant and harvest crops. This flooding was so predictable for the most part that the Egyptians could tell roughly when it was about to happen by the first time a specific star rose before sunrise, which was the basis of their entire calendar. Yet another way the ancient Egyptians were remarkably far ahead of their time. Okay, so now that we understand how snowpack can be so important around the world, how will things change in the future? Well, one would expect that as the Earth warms due to climate change, snowpack around the globe will take a hit since warmer weather is less conducive to snow in general. However, this is once again an extremely nuanced subject. In addition to influencing raw temperatures, climate change has and will continue to profoundly alter precipitation patterns worldwide, which will lead to some areas growing wetter and other areas growing drier. If a certain mountain range just so happens to be in a region that grows wetter over time, that mountain range will actually have more snowpack on average than it did before. And remember, it's snowstorms that are closer to freezing that tend to hold the most water, so that bigger snowpack may also hold more water than it did otherwise. Of course, the opposite can easily happen, with drier winters thinning the snowpack and exacerbating droughts downriver. In fact, the so-called mega drought that has plagued the Colorado River in recent decades is thought to have been caused at least in part by climate change. Another byproduct of climate change is that extremes will get more common, with a snowy winter likely to be followed by a dry one or vice versa, which can remove a lot of the stability that downriver communities have come to expect and depend on over the years. When all of this is put together, the result is an extremely volatile and unfriendly landscape for rivers, cities, and ecosystems that are reliant on mountain snowmelt for their water supply, and this is sure to worsen the water insecurity issues that are already plaguing nations worldwide. And on that extremely positive note, that's all I have to say about Snowpack. As always, I'd appreciate you like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell to stay tuned for future content. Thanks and have a great day.